Yes.
you realize that Isaiah didn't write in verses. He didn't say, I think I'll make chapter 4 here in verse 1. He wrote one single letter. And so what happens a lot of times is when they're trying to help us, they break chapters, and some people believe, and it should be, that chapters 4 should be in chapter 3. It should be, in other words, it's only 6 verses, so it should be 27, 28, 29, 30, and 31. Because it makes sense only if you read verse 26, and her gates shall lament and mourn, and she being desolate shall sit upon the ground. And in that day, verse 26, 7 women shall take hold of one man, saying. Now that makes sense if you read verse 26 and verse 3. Because they're sitting on the ground and they're desolate and they're mourning because of all the destruction that's going around them.
Charles, also look at verse 25. Thy men shall fall by the sword, and thy mighty in the war. And then it comes here, the gates. Then comes into this here, telling you, the men have been slaughtered in battle.
Very many men.
And it says 7 men in one. In other words, it's a bad ratio of women.
Yeah.
Men will be in short supply. When you watch movies, I think Troy, the movie Troy, 50,000 men against 20,000 men, and think of all the families that they got destroyed. And so men are getting destroyed in battle and war, and it leaves women without any men. And so these verses serve as a summary of the preceding chapter.
Yeah.
And most other commentaries also include, it is their comments on Isaiah chapter 3. Remember that the chapter breaks are man-made and not inspired, so from time to time the chapters are sometimes poorly divided. And the next chapter, Isaiah chapter 5, are an extension, are an expansion of the judgment of the day of the Lord. So when we get to, in other words, the day of the Lord, it expands in chapter 5. So that is the reason that it's important you understand that this is one continuous story, and when you're in chapter 3, it continues in chapter 4, and it'll also continue again in chapter 5. So wars will slaughter so many men that in that day, ultimately the tribulation days, women will be willing to be self-supporting if only they can be married and escape the reproach of being childless. You understand, as we're talking about unbelievers.
Yep.
And you understand that in every age that there are a group of people that do not understand biblical understanding. And so from chapter 2, verse 12, he will judge wicked women individually by allowing a slaughtering of males. If you read chapter 2, look at Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 12. You want to read that, Richard? Isaiah chapter 2 and verse 12.
For the day of the Lord of hosts shall be upon everyone that is proud and lofty, upon everyone that is lifted up, and he should be brought low.
And so when we was in chapter 2, we kind of brought up the idea that women, there was a church did a series on the 7 wickedness of women, and 7 things that pride. I mean, I can't remember the 7 things: pride, greed, lust, and as a result of that, oftentimes that God is going to judge the sins of the world, and as a result of that, war is brought about, and therefore the slaughter of males, thereby producing a shortage of husbands. And that you find that in the MacArthur Study Bible. The male population would be so devastated in the coming invasion of Assyria and Babylon. See, prophecy has an individual thing. In other words, Isaiah was telling the people then, at that time, and in that very moment, that in months to come or a year to come, the Assyrians are going to come, the Babylons are going to come, and there's going to be war. And in those days, only men went to war.
That's right.
Not today. The women are on the front line as well as the men are. But in that day, women stayed home and men went to war. And during the Assyrian and the Babylon conflict, the women would be 7 times as numerous as the remaining men.
Right.
And the judgment of the Lord killed so many men that Isaiah predicted in that day 7 women will take hold of one man and say, we will eat our own food and provide our own clothes. Only let us be called by your name. Take away our disgrace. And this was fulfilled in the Babylonian captivity as well. And the 4th chapter, though very brief, depicts conditions which were that prevailed not only in the days following the invasion of Babylon captivity, but also in the dark days of the Great Tribulation, for Isaiah looked far beyond his own age to the day yet to come. And that is still, so it continues to happen. So, the comment, so in the period, that period of time when God will send judgment to the nations and purify Israel and preparing for the coming of His King. And so this is, and the other aspect is, you realize that God is going to accomplish His purpose. Verse 3, which we'll get into in just a few moments. And it shall come to pass. You can highlight that if you want to. It shall come to pass. It will come to pass. If one thing you can be sure of, that what God says is going to happen will come to pass. Now, you may think, if the way things are, how could it possibly happen? I mean, the way the world's going and how things are as corrupt as it is, you might say, that Satan is doing everything possible to keep God from fulfilling His purpose. And you realize that it will come to pass.
Okay.
God will accomplish His purpose. And He's going to do that. And the day of the Lord will be a time of terrible suffering. The environment will be devastating and millions of people will die. To the prophets, the day of the Lord was foreshadowed by events in their own day. And the book of Isaiah, the Assyrian conquest of the northern kingdom and the invasion of Judah and of Babylon, captivity of Judah, both pictures to coming day of the Lord. The day is coming. Things haven't changed. We haven't learned a thing yet. What took place in 645, 704 A.D., BC, before Christ. Isaiah warned them because of your disrespect to God, for your lack of love for God, for your lack of obedience to God, destruction is going to come and you're going to be destroyed. And it happened. They don't seem to learn their lessons, do they? And as a result, it's going to happen. But God is going to have all this will happen on that day. Namely, when God judges His people for trusting in other human beings and themselves rather than in Him. When you think that the President of the United States can bring about peace and prosperity, and you think that what he can do, the Congress can do, that we can have a pure country, are you kidding me? He hasn't the ability, though he might want to. And many of the judgments, prophecies in this section took place during the Babylonian captivity and during the Assyrian captivity of the northern kingdom, but that day also anticipates the tribulation time, because we've already read that in Revelation. In that day, it's a time phrase. In that day, it's a time phrase. What day? This day refers to the day of the Lord. There's a day of man, but the day of the Lord means He's going to take over.
Yep.
God is allowing Satan to run amok. God is allowing Satan to run amok. Satan can just do almost anything he wants to do in this world today. I mean, things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse, as we've seen as far as Bible times are concerned. And yet, there's going to come a day that God's going to say, that's it. It's enough. That's it. And that day, the day of the Lord, specifically praised, occurs 16 times in the Old Testament, stands in stark contrast to the day of man, typifies the present evil age.
Amen.
We live in a present evil age, rebellion, sinful thinking, sinful mankind doing their own ways, planning their own plans, and in short, living as if God did not exist. This is the essence of ungodliness and independence of the power and the rule of the so-called, we're independent people. I do what I want to do. I'm independent of anybody. This is what I choose to do. This is what I want to do. I don't live like I want to. I don't live by the rules of the church. I don't live by the rules of the Bible. This is what I want to do. And that's the age we live in. We're pretty well free to do what we want to do. And we pretty well do it. Or we rebel. There is coming a day that won't occur. God says, that's enough. I'm going to change the whole thing. The independence will be changed. When does that day of the Lord come? Why the day of the Lord is not a single day? It's not one day. It's a process of time. What will the day be? What will that day look like? What should Israel and the New Testament believers respond in the day of the Lord? How does the day of the Lord compare with the day of Christ and the day of God? And so we'll see, we'll see all that as well. So the prophet appears to look beyond the near to the far future of judgment. God gives us plenty of warning. When God was getting ready to destroy the world, in Genesis chapter 6, how many years did he warn them?
120.
120 years. He gives you plenty of time to repent. And so, the Lord said, so why does it take? Because God is a gracious God. I'm going to give you 3 years to straighten up. You know. Gee, I have 3 years to do what I want to do. And God made the ark big enough to hold everybody who's going to get saved.
That's right.
God made the ark according to specifications to Noah, and he knew at the end of 120 years how many people would get on the ark.
That's right.
Isn't that interesting? Mm-hmm. And everybody that got saved was able to get on the ark. How many got on the ark?
8.
How many?
8.
8. Okay. Now, for 120 years, 8.